I picked up a story the other day. Where did I get this? USA Today. And it said bilingual voting ballots ordered in 25 states. And I looked up the law, and I didn't get it straight from the Voting Rights Act page. I got it from a blog, and so I don't know if it's really correct. But I think, at least on the blog, it says requirements of the Voting Rights Act requires bilingual ballots if a minority group has at least 10,000 citizens or comprises 5% of the jurisdiction's voting age population. And as usual, when I'm confused or don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to an issue, I give a call to the experts. I have Susan, is it Bibby or Bibby with us on the radio?
It's Suzanne Bibby.
Suzanne Bibby. All right. Director of Government Relations. Here on the copy it says ProEnglish. That's the organization that takes a look at this and tries to persuade lawmakers to adopt English as the official language, right?
That's correct. Our mission is to establish English as the official language at all levels of government. So at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And so the thing I read from the blog of the requirement on the Voting Rights Act, if you have a certain amount of people in your area or a certain percentage in your jurisdiction, you have to provide bilingual voting ballots. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. In 1975, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was amended to include these provisions mandating bilingual ballots for certain what they call language minorities. So if there's a certain percentage, which is either 5% of the voting age citizens living in that jurisdiction, or 10,000 citizens in that area who are of either four groups, which are American Indians, so Native Americans, Asian Americans, Alaskan Natives, and Americans of Spanish heritage. So if you have a certain number of any of those groups, then that basically the threshold kicks in, and you have to provide these very expensive ballots for federal elections.
When you say very expensive, is there any way to put a number on that?
Yeah, well, it's different for all areas.
But I mean in the thousands, tens of thousands, millions?
Oh, yeah, hundreds of thousands, too. It can go to millions, depending on, how big the jurisdiction is. In 2002, one of the most expensive figures I've ever seen was in Los Angeles, California, and they had to spend $3.3 million in 2002 to provide these ballots in various languages. So they had to do a bilingual ballot for Spanish, for Chinese, for Vietnamese, Japanese, and Filipino. So it was many languages where they met the threshold. So the most recent example was the last election, 2010, Cuyahoga County in Ohio. They met the threshold because they had the 5% or 10,000 citizens who were Puerto Rican born. So that also will throw you into the requirements, the mandate, if you have a certain number of Puerto Rican residents living in the jurisdiction. So, and they spent about $100,000 just to provide them in English and Spanish for that election alone.
I don't think I've been reading enough. When I read that 25 states had been ordered to produce bilingual ballots, I thought this was something new. But if the parameters are 10,000 citizens or 5% of the population, I would assume this has been going on for a long time, right?
Right. It's been happening since 1975. So decades. And the original intent when they, added this amendment in 1975, because originally the Voting Rights Act did not include this bilingual ballot requirement. They added it in the 70s basically for educational reasons. They said, these groups didn't really have historically the same access to education that some other groups did. So it was basically just a temporary remedy to help them in voting so they weren't disenfranchised. However, now Asian Americans and Indian Americans, meaning people from India, they have some of the highest levels of, educational achievement in the country, but they're still being included in as needing language assistance. So it's really unnecessary. It's, long overdue to be repealed. And it's really an unfair burden on these jurisdictions that many of them, especially the states, there are 3 states where they have to provide a bilingual ballot for the entire state, and those are California, Florida, and Texas. These states are already cash-strapped, especially California, of course. They've already have, major budget deficits, and now they're going to have to pay for these expensive ballots, and bilingual poll workers are another thing. They have to pay the people to, interpret and translate the ballots, which lots of times can have a lot of errors and inaccuracies on the printed ballots. So it really is a burden on taxpayers because it is an unfunded mandate. So there is no federal money set aside to help the counties and the jurisdictions pay for these.
I admit to being highly uneducated when it comes to voting in America. I had no idea that bilingual voting ballots were required and have been in place apparently for quite a while. News story out of USA Today last week. Federal government has ordered 25 states to provide the bilingual ballots. And the Voting Rights Act mandates bilingual material if a Latino, Asian American, American Indian, or Alaskan minority group is unable to speak or understand English well enough to vote in elections. And the Voting Rights Act also says requirements require bilingual ballots if a minority group has at least 10,000 citizens or comprise 5% of a jurisdiction's voting age population. Suzanne Bibby, director of the government relations for what's called ProEnglish. It's a group advocating English as an official language at all levels of government. Suzanne, help me here. I thought that when somebody becomes a citizen, they have to know enough English to pass the test to become a citizen. Is that incorrect?
No, that's correct. It's been required ever since 1907.
So if you know enough English to pass a test, how do you not know enough English to recognize, vote here, Republican, Independent, or whatever it does say?
Right. Well, that's actually part of the problem is that most bilingual ballots go to waste. The GAO, because the majority of citizens, and even those who've been naturalized, who are originally immigrants, they can speak English and they can understand it and they can read it enough that they're able to vote. So the fact that this bilingual ballot mandate is still is still existing, even though it was supposed to be a remedy for another reason, is outrageous. And GAO did a study, I believe it was in 1986, and it showed, I think it was the only one they've done, that showed that once they print these ballots, the majority of the people who walk into a polling place don't even pick them up to use them. There have been a few instances where they have been used basically to encourage non-citizen voting, which is another problem. How do
you vote if you're a non-citizen?
Well, if there's not an ID, voter identification, that's a huge, basically open door to
are there precincts? Are there precincts that allow you to vote without identification? I know I've got to present identification when I vote.
I believe so. I know in some areas, I mean, this isn't really ProEnglish's issue, the voter ID issue, but I know that, where it's supposed to be enforced, some places just are very, very lax and they don't. So it's very easy to have a non-citizen voting. I guess the voter fraud issue is a little not our main argument against bilingual ballots. That basically that they shouldn't be allowed at all, mainly for the English proficiency reason that only U.S. citizens can vote first of all, and that all U.S. citizens are presumably required to understand English to a certain extent, whether they're totally fluent or not. They have to have some degree of English proficiency, and actually another problem with the English issue and being able to speak it and how well citizens can speak it is the Census Bureau. And there was a letter sent from the House Judiciary Committee by Trent Franks and Trey Gowdy a couple months ago, asking them to delay the release of this whole list that they just put out 2 weeks ago. Delay the list, and we want to know how you're determining all of these jurisdictions. Who are you including in this? Are you including people who speak English well? And they use the American Community Survey, which is basically a more detailed version of the census, that asks, do you speak English? How well do you speak it? Do you speak another language at home? And they're including people who speak another language at home and also note on the survey that they speak English well. So they're including people who speak English well, who don't speak it at all, who speak it, fair. So basically, if you don't note that you can speak English very well, you are being included as a non-proficient English speaker.
Very interesting.
Which is a huge problem because it's tripling the number of jurisdictions that have to provide these ballots, and another reason why they're going to waste. Because even if every single, multilingual person, citizen, you might speak Spanish at home and Italian at home, but you also might speak English perfectly fluently, but you just say you speak it well, that will be included, and so a lot of jurisdictions that are providing these ballots, they could have 100% of the citizens in that area who are completely proficient in speaking English. So it's a real burden, and it's time that Congress repeals it.
All right, let's go to one of our listeners who has questions. Mashir is on the air, and I think you're with the NAACP.
Yeah, I'm chairman of the state NAACP Economic Development.
I appreciate the call.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to ask your guest a quick question before making a comment. Do you support the State of Israel or the founding of the State of Israel?
That ProEnglish has no.
I'm asking you from a context, from a historical context.
What does that have to do with? What does that have to do with this subject?
This is what it has to do with. Because this organization has liquidated history. On one hand, we believe, in general, that people from Europe who have no roots in the Middle East should be allowed to return and to have a state. All of us support that. On the other hand, in terms of American history, the Native American peoples of all types, their land has been forcibly taken, and for them not to have a right to have their languages published is nonsense. Secondly, if you know anything about American history, you also know that Hispanic populations, through the Louisiana Purchase and then afterwards through the Texas annexation, etc., people woke up one day on the other side of the language barrier or the border and have historic roots in California and in Mexico, old Mexico at the same time. So the whole question of Hispanic people and the kind of economic situation that were foisted on them that they didn't vote for, but through force and annexation, through manifest destiny, should not in any kind of way liquidate their right to speak Spanish, just as the Israelis now or the European Jews had a right to return to Israel.
But that was decades ago. You don't think people that live in this country?
That's my point. Once you argue that Israel should exist, and there's a right to return for people who've never, ever, ever been in the Middle East, and you say that there's a historic right for these people to exist, you cannot liquidate the rights of people that have been over 100 or 200 years face certain conditions. This stuff goes back to the Voting Rights Act and the whole question of de jure and de facto segregation and the way in which people were disenfranchised through poll taxes, reading, various different kind of reading tests, etc.
Okay, look, we're running out of time. I think I understand what you're saying. I don't quite get it.
Right.
Pardon?
That Puerto Ricans, the last point is, Puerto Rico, the same thing. Annexed property. They never had an opportunity to make a decision.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just running out of time. And Suzanne, I'll give you a couple of seconds. I've run out of time. Do you have a response to that? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, our reasoning for opposing this is not as complicated as all that. Pro-English opposes anything that diminishes the role of English as our common unifying language, and that really is the sole motivation for, one, supporting official English, and two, for supporting the repeal of bilingual ballots. Campaigns here, government is conducted pretty much solely in English. Political campaigns are done solely in English. So allowing people to vote in a foreign language really is an inconsistency that doesn't make any sense, especially since, again, only citizens can vote. People choose to become a citizen if they're an immigrant. No one's forcing them to become a citizen. Legal residents, legal immigrants who are just here on visas or, student visas, they're not eligible to vote. So, you're completely in agreement that English proficiency is a requirement, and voting really is it's a right, and immigration to the United States and becoming a citizen is a real privilege, and it's just time that we do away with these unnecessary bilingual ballots. English should be the uniform language. It is good to encourage assimilation. We don't want people to, totally reject their, native heritage or even their native language. But in terms of voting, it should be done in English.
Suzanne, I appreciate the time very much. Good talking to you. Have a good day.
Thank you.